up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts.
Well, good afternoon and greetings. According to Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, Pentagon says Hegseth's order will redirect spending, not make actual cuts. The Pentagon wants to shift spending to Trump's plan for an Iron Dome for America, which will have a huge price tag and likely start a new arms race. So instead of spending billions of dollars for a new Iron Dome for America, why not stop antagonizing, threatening, sanctioning, and stealing the money and assets from sovereign wealth funds? Why not use diplomacy to turn enemies into competitors and turn conflict into competition? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. So here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Acting Secretary of Defense Robert Salesses said in a statement Wednesday evening that the Secretary of Defense Hegseth has ordered a review of Pentagon spending to realign spending to fund priorities of the Trump administration. What are these priorities? Well, today I'm going to take some time to unpack some of this so that we can find out. So, where are we? Well, let's see here. So yesterday, oh, wow, right off the top, Lee Ricks, thank you for that super sticker. That, man, we're starting off strong. And that's exactly how we need to start off because things are tight. So on Thursday, Hegseth said that the Trump administration would be taking $50 billion away from, quote, woke Biden-era non-lethal programs and instead spend that money on President Trump's America's First Peace Through Strength priorities. Well, folks, so first of all, what does this slogan mean? Peace through strength. How long have we been hearing this gibberish And when has America ever come close to accomplishing this? I'll tell you when. Never. This is a fiction. It's rhetoric. It's marketing lingo to fool people into believing that somehow, mysteriously, we can invest so much of our limited resources into weaponry. We can spend so much time using jingoistic language that we will eventually scare our largest adversaries into submission. Ask yourself this: when was the last time the United States won a war? When was the last time the United States won a conflict? Since World War II. When was the last time? We got our hind parts whooped in Vietnam. We spent, I don't know, what, $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion in Afghanistan over a span of about 22 years. We went in to fight the Taliban, and the Taliban is still ruling Afghanistan. We lost in Iraq. We lost in Libya. When was the last time? So I'll give you Panama. The United States went in, invaded Panama. Okay, I'll give you Panama. The huge militaristic hegemon called Panama. When was the last time the United States won a conflict? We just lost in Ukraine. So with that, the president wants to further bankrupt America by continuing to cut taxes, increase military spending, and do all of this on the backs of the poor, the working, and middle classes. This isn't making America safe. It's actually tilling the soil for social unrest due to growing inequality in America. He believes that somehow, some way, he can scare Russia into submission. Somehow, we can threaten and scare China into submission. Here's a newsflash. These folks don't bluff. These folks don't scare. These folks don't capitulate. The sooner Western media stops lying to the American people, the better off and the safer the world is going to be. Here's an example. If you think about, if you've turned on your television over the last week as Donald Trump, either directly or through his minions, has come out and said, Volodymyr Zelensky, you're a dictator because you haven't held elections. You're not going to reclaim the territory that you've lost in this conflict with Russia. You, what else has he said? Oh, he said he's a dictator. He also, basically, what Donald Trump has ticked off and articulated is surrender. He's come out and told Zelensky, American troops will not be on Ukrainian soil defending Ukraine. He's basically come out and said, it's time for surrender. But, and how has that been narrated on MSNBC, on CNN, throughout other mainstream Western media outlets? It's people are aghast with what they're hearing. And ironically, it's incredibly consistent with what I've been saying and what others, Misty Winston mentioned this yesterday, have been saying for a very long time. In March of 24, last year, Professors Nikolai Petro and Ted Snyder, they co-authored a piece entitled 4 Myths That Are Preventing Peace in Ukraine. What are these myths? Listen to this analysis. I know Professor Petro. I don't know Ted Snyder, but I interview Professor Petro quite often. In fact, he's going to be with us this coming Thursday. 4 myths that are preventing peace in Ukraine. And this was back from March of last year. Myth number 1, how many of y'all have heard if Putin is not defeated in Ukraine, he will roll into Europe? You got to stop him in Ukraine, because if you don't stop him in Ukraine, his master plan, his whole scheme is to roll through Ukraine into Europe, and then, I don't know, you're going to find him in Cleveland, I guess. Petro and Snyder write, both Ukrainian and American officials have repeatedly warned that Ukraine is not just a nation to be defended from an illegal Russian invasion, but this is the dam holding Putin back from invading Europe. Quote, if Putin takes Ukraine, Joe Biden told Congress on December 6th of 2023, he won't stop there. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. Joe Biden said that to Congress on December 6th. But Putin has made it clear. In fact, let me change that. Putin has not made that pretty clear. In fact, Putin has consistently said, quote, the Ukraine crisis is not a territorial conflict. The issue is much broader, much more fundamental, and is about the principles underlying the new international order. The rules-based order that the former Secretary of State loved to talk about. They continue, Biden has also claimed from the beginning that beginning of the war, that Putin, quote, has much larger ambitions than Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about, end quote. Secretary of State Blinken has also said Putin has, quote, made clear that he'd like to reconstitute the Soviet empire, end quote. Folks, has anyone in the former Biden administration ever presented evidence to support these assertions? Did Tony Blinken ever come to the podium and read a speech of President Putin's where he made the assertion that he'd like to reconstitute the Soviet empire? When Biden was before Congress on December 6th, talking about he's going to keep going, he's made that pretty clear. Did Joe Biden say, and for example, here is evidence of that assertion? No. Why not? Because it's a lie. That's why. Because Putin's never said that. And I'm not saying this as a defender of Putin, because he doesn't need me to defend him. I'm saying this as a defender of the truth. That's never been said by President Putin. Yet, staying with Petro and Snyder, these goals ascribed to Putin differ sharply from his stated goals, which include, quote, a guarantee that Ukraine will remain neutral and not join NATO, a guarantee that NATO won't turn Ukraine into an armed anti-Russian bridgehead on its border, and assurances that the civil rights of Russophile Ukrainians will be protected. When you listen to Trump talk about a peace agreement, that's what Trump is saying today. The things that Putin has been demanding from day one. Stop threatening me. Stop putting my country in a vice of NATO countries with missiles at my border, on my border, pointed into my country. If you just stop doing that, everything will be cool. Myth number 2. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was never about NATO. And again, this is Petro and Professors Petro and Snyder. They go on to write, Western officials insist that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked. We hear that all the time. They talk on all of these channels about the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that Russia's decision to illegally invade was never about NATO expansion and crossing Russia's red lines, but rather a, quote, senseless war against a sovereign, freedom-loving nation, end quote. But NATO's insistence that Putin was not motivated by its eastward expansion is challenged by NATO itself. On September 7th of 2023, the then NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg made the stunning admission that Putin's decision to invade Ukraine was indeed provoked by NATO encroachment on Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg, then Secretary General of NATO, made that stunning admission that the decision to invade Ukraine was provoked by NATO. He said that. Prior to making the decision to invade Ukraine, Stoltenberg said that Putin had, quote, sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us, this is Stoltenberg, and was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that, end quote. Petro and Snyder made the statement, provided the evidence to support the statement. Biden makes statements, provides no evidence to support the statements. Tony Blinken makes assertions, provides no evidence to support the assertion. Folks, also remember when Biden and Putin met in Geneva in June of 2021, Putin gave Biden a list of his concerns, of his security concerns. Biden ignored him. So, contrary to all the pearl clutching and exasperating rhetoric from all of these so-called experts in mainstream media, MSNBC and CNN, all these people that Rachel Maddow wants to parade through her show like a bunch of ducks at a circus. On the 7th of September of 2023, NATO Secretary Stoltenberg exposed that narrative for the lie that it is. Myth number 3. The war in Ukraine is a war of democracy versus autocracy. You hear this all the time. We have to stay in Ukraine. We have to defend Ukraine because the United States, by defending Ukraine, and NATO and the West, by defending Ukraine, is defending democracy. Because Putin is an autocrat. Putin is a dictator. All of these other things, which he may be. He may be. But he didn't invade Ukraine. And democracy in Ukraine, yes, was threatened. But threatened by who? According to this narrative, and this is, again, Petro and Snyder, according to this narrative, Russia cannot be allowed to win because this war is not just about Ukraine. It's the first battlefield in a larger war for democracy against autocracy. But they write, Russia abandoned the goal of exporting an ideology when the Soviet Union collapsed. In fact, its constitution, yes, Russia has a constitution, Article 13 in their constitution explicitly prohibits the imposition of a single state ideology. According to Petro and Snyder, Russia is fighting not against democracy, but for its security concerns. Nor can the U.S. plausibly claim to be fighting on behalf of democracy when it is actively trying to enlist autocracies like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and China to join its side. That's Petro and Snyder. Folks, also remember, if this is a war of democracy versus autocracy, why did the United States overthrow the democratically elected Viktor Yanukovych government in the Maidan coup in 2014? Why, Joe Biden, did you overthrow a democracy in order to wage a war to save democracy? That's a simple question. I don't think it's that complex. I don't think it's that absurd. I don't think it's realistic. Folks, ask yourself, if we're there to save democracy, why did the Biden administration overthrow a democracy and then start a war to save democracy? Branko Marcetic, journalist extraordinaire, wrote, in 2014, Ukraine, great power gamesmanship, righteous anger at a corrupt status quo and opportunistic far-right extremists toppled the government in the Maidan revolution. Today's crisis in Ukraine can't be understood without understanding Maidan. I'm going to repeat that. Today's crisis in Ukraine can't be understood without understanding Maidan. Branko is correct, but why? Some of y'all, when was the last time you heard anybody on a mainstream outlet mention the Maidan coup? When was the last time? The last time was never, because they don't want to have that conversation. Because if they have that conversation, that starts to unravel the entire narrative. He goes on, Branko Marcetic goes on, there's one more critical piece to the Euro-Maidan puzzle, the role of Western governments. For decades, Washington and allied governments have pursued their strategic and economic interests under the cover of promoting democracy and liberal values abroad. Sometimes that's meant funneling money to violent reactionaries like the Nicaraguan Contras, and sometimes it's meant supporting benign pro-democracy movements like those in Ukraine. Quote, external actors have always played an important role in shaping and supporting civil society in Ukraine. That's a Ukrainian scholar, Iryana Solonenko. She wrote this in 2015, pointing to the European Union and the U.S. through agencies like the National Endowment for Democracy and the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, whose Kiev headquarters were in the same compound as the U.S. Embassy. Quote, one can argue that without this external support, which has been the major source of funding for Ukrainian civil society since independence, Ukrainian civil society would not have become what it is now. You need to Google Branko Marcetic, read his piece on the Maidan coup, because he connects the dots very clearly between what was happening in the Yanukovych government before the coup, the United States involvement in the coup, and how all of that has gotten us to where we are in Ukraine right now. And what's the fourth myth? The fourth myth is Putin is not interested in negotiating. They continue. The West insists that Putin is not interested in negotiating an end to this war, despite multiple news reports. And this is from 2014. I'm sorry. When did they write this thing? What did I say? They wrote this thing in, 2024, not 2014. They wrote this in March of last year. So listen to this from last year and then look at where we are right now. Putin is not interested in negotiating. The West insists that Putin is not interested in negotiating an end to this war, despite multiple news reports, and they reference the reports, that he, quote, has been signaling through intermediaries, end quote, that he, quote, is open to a ceasefire, end quote, and that he is ready to make a deal. The White House continues to insist that Putin has shown absolutely zero indication he's willing to negotiate. What we also know with this during the Biden administration is that Biden told Tony Blinken and told those in the Department of State, do not talk to Russia. If the phone rings, don't answer it. If you're trying to bring an end to the war, Joe Biden, how do you do that when you're not talking to your adversary? Who are you negotiating with? Who are you trying to talk to? If you're not talking to the Russians, you just must be sitting there talking to yourself. But Petro and Snyder continue. The historical record shows that Putin has sought a negotiated settlement since the opening days of the war. By all accounts, Russia and Ukraine had even reached a tentative agreement in Istanbul in April of 2022. You've heard me talk about that agreement in previous shows. And they go on to say, this has been confirmed by American reporting, and they provide the citations, they provide the links, by then Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, by former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, and by Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and Numan Kurtulmus. My Turkish is a bit rusty. He's the deputy chairman of Erdogan's party. So they make the assertions, they provide the evidence to support the assertions that they've made. Joe Biden made a whole bunch of statements, never provided proof. Tony Blinken made a whole bunch of statements, never provided proof. Why? Because they didn't have any proof. Why didn't they have any proof? Because they were lying to you. They go on to say, even more importantly, Putin's sincerity about negotiating has been confirmed by numerous Ukrainian delegates at these talks. Ukrainians had talked about this. Folks, stop with the ahistorical narratives and the lies. Do some homework. Do some research. Let's move on to another issue. Quote, long live the king, end quote. Trump likens himself to royalty on Truth Social. In a post on his social media platform, Truth Social, this past Wednesday, the president equated himself to a king as he celebrated his administration's move to kill the New York City's congestion pricing program. What is congestion pricing? It's a pricing process where the tolls into Manhattan, the price of the tolls into Manhattan, I think into lower Manhattan, like through the Lincoln Tunnel, through the Holland Tunnel, I think, go up at certain times of the day and on the weekends as a way of de-incentivizing people from driving into the city and raising the congestion levels in the city, because that impacts the environment through carbon emissions, and it makes it harder to get around in the city during certain times of the day because of gridlock. So they came up with a plan to raise tolls, and they do it. As a matter of fact, they do that in Virginia on the toll roads. They have congestion pricing in Virginia. Haven't heard Donald Trump talk about doing anything about that. And those prices in Virginia are 3 and 4 times the non-peak pricing rates. But anyway, and this is a scheme or a process, and I use the word scheme. I don't mean it as a derogatory statement. Process or a scheme to that had been studied for a couple of years, and Kathy Hochul, the governor, worked it through the Biden administration to get so it has federal or national government approval. Well, Trump writes, quote, "Congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. Long live the king," end quote. The White House then reinforced the message, recirculating it on Instagram and X with an illustration of Trump wearing a crown on a magazine cover resembling Time, but the title of the magazine is called Trump. Hochul issued a statement saying, "We're a nation of laws, not ruled by a king. New York hasn't labored under a king in over 250 years. We sure as hell are not going to start now. In case you didn't know, New Yorkers, we're going to fight. We do not back down, not now, not ever." Why does Donald Trump decide to pick this fight with Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York? Is it tied to the whole issue with the mayor, Adams, and his case? Well, that's a question for another time. Just last week, Trump made it clear that he believed he had broad leeway to reshape the government in any way he sees fit, when he posted, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law. He who saves his country does not violate any law." Now, that idea most recently came from then President Richard Nixon, but many attribute that the origin of that quote to Napoleon Bonaparte. But that brings to my mind the Sun Tzu quote, "An evil man will burn his own village to the ground in order to rule over the ashes." Because when you look at what the Trump administration has been engaged in over the last month, the recklessness with which they are just wreaking havoc across the country, across the government, there seems to be no rhyme, there seems to be no reason. They're just out there freelancing. They're just out there freelancing, wilding. They're out there wilding out. An evil man will burn his own village to the ground in order to rule over the ashes. Now, Steve Bannon, the Trump whisperer from 2016, told us in 2019, and he was also the Trump whisperer in 20. He told us in 2019 what was in store for the country. Steve Bannon told us, and I've said this to y'all before, he told us what the mission of the Trump regime would be. Quote, we had a whole tiger team of the White House counsel guys, the deconstruction of the administrative state, which is a huge element. We want less government intervention. In fact, we want to start to take apart certain parts of the apparatus, end quote. Steve Bannon told us, the Trump whisperer told us, we want to start to take apart certain aspects of the apparatus, the deconstruction of the administrative state. And that's exactly what they're doing with this Doge foolishness and Elon Musk. Elon Musk has replaced Steve Bannon. Why? I don't know, because they haven't called and explained it to me, but I will suggest to you, I will posit that it has to do with the fact that Steve Bannon, like him or not, is an ideologue. Steve Bannon has a very firm, very clear perspective, a very clear worldview, a very clear ideology of how he wants the world to run. Donald Trump, as we've said many times, doesn't have that overarching, controlling worldview. Donald Trump is transactional. Donald Trump operates in the moment. Donald Trump operates in what's in it for me and what's in it for me right now. He's analogous to a petulant child who wants to have pancakes at dinner, wants to have French toast for breakfast, and doesn't care about nutrition, doesn't care about balance, doesn't care. He just wants what he wants when he wants it. An evil man will burn his own village to the ground in order to rule over the ashes. The deconstruction of the administrative state. America, you were warned. And forewarned is forearmed. Unfortunately, not enough Americans listened and understood what they were being told. And now he's showing you. The American people are being subjected to this flurry or whirlwind of executive action. Bannon called it flooding the zone and muzzle velocity. He said, every day we hit them with three things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. He said these guys will never be able to recover. But we've got to start with muzzle velocity. Some folks think Trump is crazy. And he is. But he's crazy like a fox. He believes in what's called the Unitary executive theory. He believes in the Unitary executive theory. What is that? Well, he's trying to advance a once considered fringe legal theory, which asserts that the president has unlimited power to control the actions of the over 4 million people who make up the executive branch, or at least before he started firing them, made up the executive branch. Now, there isn't one set interpretation of the theory, but no matter what scholars you talk to, I think what runs consistent through their analysis is, or the proponents of it generally believe, that Article 2 of the Constitution allows the president to remove all executive branch officers However, there are adherents, including Trump and many of his allies, who believe the president retains all the executive power and can control all officers and control all agencies. The first point I'll give you of a reality check here, and I say this as a political scientist and a professor who teaches American government. The first hole in this unitary argument is the reality of the concept of what's called checks and balances. We have three branches of government in the United States based upon the Constitution. Article 1 in the Constitution allows for the legislative branch. Article 2 allows for the executive branch. That's the president. Article 3 allows for the judicial branch or the judiciary. The framers set up three branches of government, three co-equal branches of government. Co-equal branches of government. One can assume, this is my opinion, but it's a fairly it's a fairly broadly held opinion, I believe. One can assume, even though they are co-equal, the framers listed them in order of importance, not power, because no one branch has more power than the other. They are co-equal, but importance. So this unitary executive theory, I mean, it's a nice, theoretical, intellectual debate. But in terms of practical application, I don't see how it holds any water. Because no one in their right mind who understands American history would conclude that a bunch of men who fought a war against a king, the American Revolutionary War, was fought against a king, against a monarch. No group of people who fought a war against a king to free themselves from the tyranny of the monarch would take the time to write a document, to structure a government, and turn around and instill the power of a king into the executive branch. That's, as my older brother Ronnie would call it, felony stupid. They wouldn't do it. That's why we have the idea. That's why we have the concept of checks and balances. You have three co-equal branches of government, and they all have distinct functions and power, hence separation of powers. They have three distinct power, separation of power. The legislative branch writes legislation. The executive branch enforces legislation. The judiciary determines the constitutionality of the legislation, of the laws. But if you put them on a diagram, like a Venn diagram, they're concentric circles. They overlap. Hence, the checks and balances. The checks and balances is the overlapping of those the space that overlaps within those concentric circles. So what does that all mean? It means the legislative branch has its power. Okay, simple example. The House of Representatives and the Senate, they pass a piece of legislation and they send it to the president for signature. it doesn't become law until the president signs it. So that's one check and balance that the executive branch has on the legislative branch. The legislative branch generates legislation, but it doesn't become law until the president signs it. If the president doesn't like it, he doesn't sign it. He vetoes it. That's a check and balance on the legislature. But the legislature has a check on the president's veto. But the president, if 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate vote again, they can override the president's veto. So there are checks and balances. And then the court has its balance, because the court, if Mel W with his $5 super sticker, or Kevin Baptiste with his $10 super sticker, if they decide to sue because they believe that the law is unconstitutional, then the court can determine that the law is unconstitutional and it's no longer law. That's the court's check and balance on the executive branch and on the legislature. But what can the legislature do if they disagree with the court decision that the law they passed is unconstitutional? They can amend the Constitution. So everybody has a check and balance. So, folks, what we find ourselves in the midst of right now is something that happens periodically, but not in my lifetime, and I've been studying history for a while. I don't think we've seen anything like this. I'm not going to say in the history of the country, because, brilliant historians like Dr. Gerald Horne could, and some of this is subjective. This is troublesome stuff. Very, very, very troublesome stuff. And one of the reasons why, there are a number of reasons why it's so troublesome, but one of the reasons why it is so troublesome is because the Congress is sitting idly by. The Congress is usurping its responsibility. And they're not doing their job. They're so taken by this MAGA movement. They're so afraid to do their jobs. They're so afraid to provide the check and balance on the executive, on the president, that they're just letting this stuff go through. And we're about to find out whether or not Trump's stacking the court in the manner in which he has is going to pay the dividends that he is expecting it to pay. Because for as conservative as Coney Barrett is, and Clarence Thomas, and the others, Roberts, we are about to find out, are they truly jurists or are they jerks? That's what we're about to find out. Are they going to stand up to the oath that they swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Because one could make a very strong argument that Donald Trump is a domestic enemy in the manner in which he's trying to deconstruct the administrative state. See, it's one thing if he followed the rules. If He followed the processes. And the result of following the processes is the result we're getting now. Then okay. Okay. That's democracy. That's, you came up with an idea. You want to do away with the Department of Education, and you went to Congress. Since Congress created the Department of Education, Congress is the only entity, not the executive branch. Congress is the only entity that can do away with the Department of Education. But listen to what's Donald Trump's main argument about doing away with the Department of Education? I want to put education back in the hands of the state. Somebody needs to call that man and let him know that that's where education already resides, with the states. We have what's called a federal system of government. It's called federalism. It's called federalism. What is federalism? It's a division of power within a government, within a country. It says in the Constitution, I'm paraphrasing, the powers not delineated in and the expressed to the national government reside in the states, reside with the states. That was one of the compromises that was made in the Great Compromise between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan, as they were in Philadelphia hashing out the Constitution. The Virginia Plan. The larger states wanted a strong national government because as larger states, they believed that they could control that. Well, they weren't afraid of a large national government overtaking their power because they were large states. That was the Virginia Plan. Then there was the New Jersey Plan, the smaller states, New Jersey, Rhode Island, some of the others, Maine. They were fearful of a large national government because as smaller states, and Lee Ricks, thank you for that $10 super sticker. As smaller states, they were afraid that their sovereignty would be violated by a large national government. So they had to come to some compromises. And this was one of the compromises that they came to. So again, I'm not making this stuff up. I teach this stuff every day. So, and Raven Allen, thank you for your $5 super sticker. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. So again, they swore an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic. And Donald Trump is presenting himself as a domestic enemy. We need to build generational wealth on the mother continent, then reintroduce ourselves to this nation as corporations to give us power. Can't debate that with you. And while we're doing that, we need to build generational wealth here. And that's one of the things that doesn't get nearly as much discussion as it should. And that is the wealth disparity, the wealth gap. Last I looked, and the numbers may vary depending on the report that you look at and depending on the time frame in which the report was generated, the surveys were conducted. But I'm not going to be too far off if I say that the average wealth accumulation for a white family in the United States is somewhere between, I'll say, $180,000 and $230,000. And when we talk about wealth accumulation, what we're talking about is the value of tangible assets. We're not talking about salary. We're not talking about how much income you generate. When we talk about wealth accumulation, we're talking about the value of tangible assets. Your home, how much money you have in the bank, stock portfolio, 401k. Those are the kinds of things when you start talking about wealth accumulation and the transference of intergenerational wealth. When you pass away, what will you be able to pass on to your progeny, your children? Will you be able to pass on to them a home? And the home that you pass on to them, do you own that home in fee simple absolute? Or is that $250,000 home mortgaged with 3 mortgages on it? The average African-American family, their wealth accumulation is, I think, between like 80,000 to 120,000. And that may be high. Again, it depends on the study that you go to and who you look at, what you look at. So, Raven Allen, you're right. We need to build generational wealth on the mother continent. That is true. But we can do two things. Two things can be true at the same time. And we can do multiple things at the same time. While we are accumulating wealth on the mother continent, we can also be doing the same thing here. Those things are not mutually exclusive. But unfortunately, we're not really doing either of them. The book, according to AM, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court, is a good resource. That is true. Trump has stacked the deck. That is true. But here's the thing, AM. Other presidents have stacked the court other times, but found the court, once they swore the oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, they have, and they've gotten that lifetime appointment. They have sometimes, and I underscore sometimes, AM, I'm not saying you're wrong, sometimes they err on the side of the Constitution. And so, Donald, what we're praying for here, and Pauline Douglas, thank you for that $9.99 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that. Is that they will, in fact, do their jobs. They will defend the Constitution in the best interest of the country and the American citizenry. They will not fall victim to the pressure that has been put on them by the executive. They will do their job. They will be the check and balance of the overzealous, the overexertion, the overassertion by Donald Trump. We hope that as these cases make their way up the chain, for example, his attack on birthright citizenry, get back with me. The courts have responsibility to the Constitution. Absolutely right. I would have liked to have seen a super sticker with that statement. But anyway, that's as the 14th Amendment, for example, birthright citizenry. The Constitution is very clear. If you can read, you don't have to go to law school to figure this one out, even though I did go to law school. You don't have to go to law school to figure this one out. You don't have to go to college. You don't even have to have graduated high school. If you can read, Usually I have the Constitution right here, but unfortunately my briefcase is upstairs. Oh, so I'll do this really quickly because it's very short. The 14th Amendment is very, very clear. Section 1, 14th Amendment, Section 1, first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. If you can read, that one's pretty clear. And I also think that when you look at the lower court decisions on this issue, the one that came out of, I think it's, is it Colorado? I think it's Colorado. Because 3 or 4 courts have weighed in on this since Donald Trump has made his attack on the 14th Amendment, on birthright citizenship. They've been very, very clear in their decisions saying this is settled law. No court has ever questioned birthright citizenship. I mean, it's almost as though they're sending a message to the higher courts. Don't mess with this. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick. Don't let this fool do this. Rarely do I see a lower court decision as clear as I'm seeing these, and they're all consistent. Raven Allen, the reason why the mother continent is because we never build it here. They always wipe it out. Oh, I get you. You're right. You're right. I mean, a lot of people ask the question, well, why haven't we built more? It's not that we haven't tried. It's that when we do, to Raven's point, they burn it down. Literally. Burn it down. Burn it down? Burn it down? The burning, massacre, destruction, and the Tulsa race riot of 1921. They burn it down. Red Summer, the summer of 1919, and the awakening of Black America. They burn it down. Reconstructing the Dreamland, the Tulsa race riot of 1921. They burn it down. And those are just a few. They burn it down. But we got to keep building. We got to keep building. Here, and because, Raven, you're right. Not only from a African continent perspective, but also because we have to continue to internationalize our plight. We have to continue to internationalize our plight. The same racism that we are experiencing here manifests itself in Congo. It manifests itself in American imperialism in other countries. That's one of the biggest conflicts between the United States and Russia. Imperialism. The Soviet Union / Russia has been anti-imperialist. The United States is an imperialist. So that's always been the conflict between the United States and what was the USSR and what is now the country of Russia. Where is Patrice Lumumba University? It's in Russia. Who defended Lumumba? The Soviet Union. Who sent arms and troops to Angola? The Soviet Union. Those are just two examples. If you can, look at the film Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. Cuba, thank you, Zhao. Cuba as well. And final point here. Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. See, folks, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And guess what? To Wilmer, Howard Zinn, 1995. What was it making? I forgot. Oh, Peace in the World, $20 super sticker. We could be more clandestine in our plans, don't you think? Oh, absolutely. Oh, I know what I was talking about as I get out here. The internationalization of our struggle. That's what Dr. King got to with his Beyond Vietnam, Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam. A Time to Break Silence, Why I Oppose War in Vietnam. Dr. King moved to internationalize our struggle. That's what got him assassinated. Malcolm X, after he made Hajj, realized we have to internationalize our struggle, and that not all white people are our enemy. They are not all devils. He found allies. He found white Muslims. He found Muslims of all ethnicities and phenotypes, and realized we have to internationalize our struggle. Hence the Bandung Conference, the gathering of non-aligned nations. And that's where the coalitions needed to be built. We have to do that. But in order for us to do that, we have to get out of our own way. You can't sit there and listen to Hakeem Jeffries whine on CNN about, quote, they have the House, they have the Senate, they have the executive branch, they have the courts. What do you want me to do? What I want you to do, Hakeem Jeffries, and I know you listen to this show, so what I want you to do. You are an elected representative in a representative democracy, in a representative republic. We want you to represent, homeboy. That's what we want you to do. What do you want me to do? I want you to do your job. I want you to represent. And if you can't, then go the hell home. Get out of the way. And I'm not trying to insult you. I'm not, homeboy. I'm not trying to do that. But this is too critical for us to be wasting time with representatives who won't represent. Get the hell on, man. Go find something else to do. This obviously is not your game. You're trying to play tennis with a hockey stick. And as a tennis player, I can tell you, it don't work that way. So I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm calling balls and strikes as we now move into baseball season, starting tomorrow. Spring training, first spring training game start tomorrow. Walter, I've had the pleasure of listening to me on XM. Now I get more of Dr. Leon live. I've learned so much. Thank you. You are, I am your hero. Well, thank you, Walter. You probably just need to get out a little more. But thank you. I really appreciate that. Everyone should be tuned in tomorrow. Oh, I'm doing straight 3-hour open phones tomorrow. So those of you that listen to me here and will tune in tomorrow to Sirius XM from 11 to 2, call in. Let's rap. But again, look, when Hakeem Jeffries and Kamala Harris and the other members of the CBC come out and back genocide, I got nothing for you. You're trying to sell me genocide. That's a non-starter. You can't do that. You can't do that. And he's not only selling genocide in Gaza, he's selling genocide in Haiti. They haven't qualified it as such, but what the United States is doing in Haiti is genocide as well. Raven, your $5, thank you, greatly appreciate it. Those of us on benefits could pay off a number of Africa's debts. 10,000 people, 20,000 per year. That's 200 million. Or the United States could do what China has done with the debt from a lot of African countries. Forgive it. Raven, you're right. We could pay it off, but as China is doing, it could be forgiven. Just write the debt off. Start again. See, a lot of people are talking about, what China's doing, taking advantage. Look at how much debt China has written off or written down from African countries. It's not a paltry sum. Folks, thank you all who contributed. Thank you all for listening to my rant today. Greatly appreciate it. And got some big hitters in store for you next week. We've got 2 members of Leonard Peltier's legal team that are going to join us. Professor Nikolai Petro is going to join us next week. We got big doings in the works for next week. Greatly, China sets debt traps for African countries. How so, Zhao Yun? How is forgiving debt setting a trap? How is what is the adage? Fair exchange ain't no theft. Fair exchange. And let me ask you this, Zhao Yun, is what China's doing relative to debt better or worse than what the World Bank is doing? Is what China is doing as it relates to debt better or worse than the IMF? Fair exchange ain't no robbery. Write that one down. Oh, it's worse. Okay. I think, in all honesty, you just say stuff to say stuff. Someone mentioned yesterday that you're just contrarian, and you write all the time. I cherry pick what I say. You've never provided any evidence of such, but I honestly believe that you're just contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. And that to me is intellectually dishonest. And I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you, but how can you, there is nothing you can present. There is nothing factual that you can present that would support your point that the financial relationships that China is engaging in is worse than the World Bank or the IMF. And here's one reason why. Because China does not engage in regime change. China does not use aid to dictate terms and conditions in a country. That's not what they do. They have what they call the win-win strategy. And they have a stated policy called the win-win strategy. And when you look at what they're doing in other countries, it's win-win. It's win-win. So, again, if you've got some evidence, would love to see you present it. But evidence is what we engage in. Evidence is the basis of what we do here. Hence, I read you the stuff from Petro. You can look at it yourself. So, with all of that, greatly appreciate you all joining me today. Thank you all for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episodes next week. Tell you who some of the folks are that are going to join us. Follow and subscribe. Thank you all so much for supporting us. The Patreon account is in dire need of contribution. Share the show. Follow us on social media. You'll find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all next week. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, blessed, and warm weekend, because it is cold as it want to be out here in D.C. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.